Hello and welcome to part 4 of how to make your acoustic guitar playing more interesting. Today we're going to talk about a technique which lots of acoustic guitarists are scared of, and that is a technique called fingerpicking. Now the basic idea of fingerpicking is we have thrown away our pick and we are just going to use these 5 fingers and they're going to work as 5 individual picks. Although saying that, most people only use the first 4 because, as we know, most of the time music we count to 4 and it makes sense to use our thumb, index, middle and ring finger and to leave that pinky kind of spare. Some people do use it to anchor, which is where you place it on top of the soundboard like this to keep everything in position. I'm personally not a fan of that because eventually you might want to use it for something and that way it just frees it up. It means you're not relying on that extra crutch. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is hand position, and this is something I've seen lots of people get wrong over the years. It's not necessarily that there are wrong ways to do it, there's just more efficient ways. So lots of people when they first start fingerpicking approach the strings like this, kind of a diagonal point as if they were about to strum. But the problem with that is you end up picking with the sides of your fingers and not the flat part, which is naturally where all our hands want to move and how our fingers want to move. So what we're going to do is we're going to tilt our hand a little bit like this. So if we're laying our hand flat across these strings, just like that. It makes it a whole lot easier because you're using the flesh of those fingers. And it means if eventually you do decide to grow your nails and use those, I'm personally not a fan of that, I'm not very good with it, it just means that it's not a whole new technique to work out once you change things. Okay. Second thing I want to talk about is what we actually do with our fingers to make them fingerpick. Because lots of people do this big, bouncy, jumpy thing. And the trouble with that is it means we've then got all this extra time and extra space which is wasted in getting our fingers back to the strings. So we want as small movement as possible, okay? Much like when you practice using a pick, you want tiny movements. It's the same for finger picking. We get the same sound whether we go this far past the string or we go this far past the string. It's a tiny bit louder, but that's not really what we need. You can always pick a little bit harder like that. You can pick more softly. So using these fingers, what you're going to do is you're curling this knuckle right here, your middle knuckle, okay? We're basically turning these fingers into a machine. So, for example, we would go, and what I'm doing there is I'm curling these knuckles a tiny, tiny bit, and they're all resting on the strings they need to be on. So they're peeling across the strings and peeling back again. Makes it a whole lot easier. And that is the basics of our hand position. There are books and books and books written on this. Best place to go if you want to find out more information about finger positioning when finger picking is to look up some classical guitar method books. They always have a long section at the beginning explaining where your hand, exactly where it should be. Of course, they sit in a different way as well. We're going to sit like this today. Next thing we're going to talk about is what do we actually name these fingers, because we can't use, for example, T, I, M, R and C because they could mean different things in different languages. So what we actually do is we use Spanish, which is very, very interesting, and we get P, I, M, A and C. I remember it because it spells Pimac, which to me sounds a little bit like Big Mac. So we get P, I, M, A, C. I'm not going to offend anybody by trying to spell out the Spanish names for these. They will be on the screen. Feel free to work out your own pronunciation for that. And the basic rule here for finger picking is we're going to assign these 3 fingers to our higher strings, so our D, G, B, or our G, B, and E strings, like that, and then we're going to let our thumb do all the heavy lifting by doing the lower notes. And the main advantage of using the finger picking instead of using a regular pick is we can now do all of our notes at once. We can pinch, which is a technique we're going to talk about in a moment, and it makes things a whole lot easier in being able to play all those notes at once. Because if we're using a pick, or just our thumb, it's impossible to play all those notes at the same time, whereas with finger picking, it's very, very possible and it sounds very, very good. We kind of pretend to be a piano. My final piece of advice before we get started is don't be lazy. When I first started finger picking, I just used these 2 guys, and it meant that for complex pieces, I was jumping around the strings a lot. So, and it's much, much easier to use all those fingers accordingly. For our first practice example, we're going to pretend to be a piano, and we're going to learn how to use all these fingers together before we start separating them. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold a C chord, the people's chord. We're going to put our thumb on the A string, our pointing finger on the D string, our middle finger on the G, and then our ring finger on the B, and we're going to pinch all those strings at the same time. Like that. So by pinching, what I mean is the thumb's going to go down, and the fingers are going to come up. So we get... You want to keep a nice steady beat and you want to get all those fingers the same volume and the same velocity. It's much easier to work out later when we look at doing bigger examples where we have to move our fingers more randomly, you'll be able to tell which fingers are not as loud as the others. Then the next step is to start separating these fingers, and this is where it starts sounding a little bit like a piano. So we can do our thumb and then fingers. And the fingers are just going to work in like a claw motion. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you're used to that, you want to reverse it, and this is where it really sounds like a pianist. This is like when a pianist would go right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand, go chord, bass, chord, bass. Sounds a little bit like Let It Be. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's the beginnings of how to pretend to be a piano with these things. Going back to our previous rules, it's very much like our first and second lesson. We have very, very similar rules for how these thumbs and fingers are going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep these three fingers glued to the G, B, and D, G, and B strings, unless we move to a D chord. So we have to move up, so they're on a G, B, and E, just because we've run out of strings. Or C. And when we go to the low strings, when we go to a low chord like G, the reason we don't move our fingers down is because we want some continuity in those notes. It's too big a jump going from... We've suddenly lost those higher notes. It's thinking more like a piano player. So when a piano player does this kind of stuff, although they're not really finger picking, what they'll tend to do is they'll move their fingers to the next available note within the chord rather than having big piano jumps the whole time. Well, at least practiced piano players will. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to learn about separating these fingers. And this is where it gets really exciting because for all of these examples, you get a lot of versatility because you can vary the chords and you can follow our 4, 5, and 6 string rule we just talked about, and you can come up with many, many different ways to accompany yourself with very, very dull chords. So if you find that all your songs contain G, C, and D, lots of beginner songs do, you can make them more interesting just by changing the finger picking pattern, because it's not what we expect. And the first thing we're going to look at is what was called P-I-M-A. So we're going to go back to our C chord, and we're going to go thumb, index, middle, ring. You want even volume. And then we're going to change to a G chord, just so we practice moving around. All that's going to change here is we're going to move our thumb down to the low E string. What you're looking for here is nice even volume. If you find that you play and suddenly one of the notes is really quiet, you know which finger to work on. And eventually you'll practice. That becomes very, very easy, and it's much more interesting than just strumming a C chord or a G chord over and over again. So that was our forward roll. We can then do the same thing backwards. So we're going to start with our thumb, and then we're going to reverse the fingers. So we're going to go thumb, ring, middle, index. And this is called PAMI. Nice name for it, P-A-M-I. So thumb, ring, middle, index. Thumb, ring, middle, index. And the same thing, we move down, we just move our thumb. And this one sped up a little bit. Next, we're going to combine those two exercises. We're going to go forwards. So we're going to go thumb, index, middle, ring. And then we're going to do our fingers backwards. So thumb, ring, middle, index. We do the same for the G chord. Thumb, index, middle, ring. Thumb, ring, middle, index. A little bit quicker. Now, this is where it's going to get really fun, because we're going to start alternating and jumping around with these fingers. So we're going to do, back on our C chord, thumb, middle, index, ring, thumb, middle, index, ring. Same for G, thumb, middle, index, ring. So a bit quicker. We're going to move on here and we're going to do some jumping. We're going to go thumb, ring, middle, index, middle. Thumb, ring, index, middle. We can then, finally, for our final example, we're going to go up and down. And this creates a 6/8 feel or a group of triplets. So we're going to go thumb, index, middle, ring, middle, index. That's on our C chord, and then we're going to move to G. So as we can see, this is a really, really versatile technique because we can take a simple chord progression, say from a Guitar Tab website. Let's say we've got a song which is E minor, A minor, and D minor. It goes back to A minor. So we're going to go E minor, A minor, D minor, A minor. We now have 6 different ways we could pick each of those chords. We could have E minor. We could do them backwards. We could go forwards and backwards. We could alternate. Helps if I stick to the right chord sequence. We could jump around. We could go up and down. So the best thing to do from here is to apply this to songs you can already strum and see if you can play around with it and apply some of these different techniques to it. As always, feel free to leave comments below. Let me know how I'm doing with this because there's a lot more in store. Please go back and check out the previous 3 videos if any of this made sense and you thought, why was that guy referring to an earlier video? There are 3 other videos to watch and they are all following on from each other. You will also find below the link to the Facebook page which will also contain the tabs for this lesson for free. Hope you have a great day and hope you get a lot out of this.